So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Akila Radhakrishnan, the president of the Global Justice Center, a human rights organization using international law to achieve gender equality to dismantle systems of oppression. We combine feminist legal analysis with strategic advocacy to ensure equal protection of the law for women and girls. I'm going to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. So in terms of our run of show, you're going to first hear from our panelists with some opening remarks, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A with them. After that, we'll open it up to an audience Q&A, so feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. You can ask the questions at any time. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout the event, and if you're directing your question to any particular panelist, please feel free to let us know that. So to get us started, I'm just going to very briefly frame the discussion. So the Tatmadaw, or the Myanmar military and security forces, have long used sexual violence as a tactic to terrorize civilians, especially ethnic minorities and women, girls, and gender diverse people. As the Myanmar FFM found, sexual violence is a hallmark of the Tatmadaw, and it is a connecting thread between the atrocities committed across the country, whether as a part of ethnic conflicts and suppression, or now today against the populace at large in the wake of the coup. In addition, since the Rohingya genocide in 2017, the Tatmadaw have also been listed annually as a party in the reports of the Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence. However, despite this recognition, the Tatmadaw has long been afforded total impunity for its crimes. As the Myanmar FFM found, impunity for gross rights violations has significantly and demonstrably contributed to the validation of deeply oppressive and discriminatory conduct, enabled reoccurrence of human rights violations and atrocity crimes, and emboldened perpetrators and silenced victims. And there's no doubt that this rampant impunity also directly enabled the February 2021 coup. As High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet has said, this is a crisis born from impunity. So today, you'll be hearing from our panelists about these patterns of sexual violence, as well as why the need to ensure accountability is an imperative and how. So now let me introduce our wonderful panelists. First, we have Weiwei Nu. Weiwei is a former political prisoner and the founder and executive director of Women Peace Network in Myanmar. Weiwei spent 7 years as a political prisoner in Burma because of her father's pro-democracy political activism. Since her release from prison in 2012, she's dedicated herself to working for democracy and human rights, particularly on behalf of marginalized women and members of her own ethnic group, the Rohingya. Next, we have Esther Zina. Esther is a Kachin youth activist from northern Shan region in Myanmar, which has been plagued by civil conflicts for over 7 decades. She started her peace activist journey with the Kachin Peace Network in 2012 and is still an active member of the network as the youth coordinator, organizing peace and humanitarian movements across the country. She's also one of the coordinators of the Kachin Youth Policy Working Team, an executive member of Revolutionary Democratic Vanguard, and one of the coordinators of the National Ethnic Youth Alliance. Her leadership, particularly since the attempted coup, recognized Esther as one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world in 2021. Next, we have Nawaku Shee, who is a prominent Karen activist working to promote human rights, democracy, and peace. She's currently coordinator at Karen Peace Support Network, the largest network of Karen community-based organizations representing more than 20 Karen civil society organizations from Burma. In 2012, Bakushi was also elected as the Joint General Secretary of the Women's League of Burma, and she's also a member of the Karen Women's Organizing Steering Committee with a membership of over 60,000 working to empower women in the struggle for peace and gender equality and a federal democratic Burma. And finally, we have Ambassador Kelly Curry. Ambassador Curry served as the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues and the U.S. representative at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which brings us here today. Prior to her appointment, she led the Department of State's Office of Global Criminal Justice and served as the United States representative to the UN Economic and Social Council and as alternative representative to the UN General Assembly. Throughout her career in foreign policy, Ambassador Curry has specialized in human rights, political reform, development and humanitarian issues, as well as a focus on the Asia-Pacific region. So I thank you all so much for joining us today and really look forward to an engaging and robust discussion. So to get us started, I'm going to first turn to Weiwei. So Weiwei, the Rohingya genocide was characterized by sexual and gender-based violence, with the UN finding instances not only during the 2016 and 2017 clearance operations, but also during violence in 2012. In addition, Rohingya women and girls in Bangladesh remain vulnerable to violence in the camps, including from within their own community. Wei Wei, can you please lay out for us the context of this violence and what the Rohingya's hopes for justice are?
Thank you very much, Akila. It is always an honor to join these incredible women leaders and experts, including all of you. It's always been for me encouraging and empowering to join a bunch of women panel. So I'm so honored and happy to be here. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Yes, the Myanmar military has been committing a strategic and widespread attack of sexual and gender-based violence for decades. We must also remember that the current Myanmar junta is composed of the same forces that launches the genocidal attack against our community in 2017 and continue to practice genocidal policies and segregations in Myanmar. Until February 1st, 2021 attempted coup, those primarily targeted by the Myanmar military's brutal campaign of sexual violence were women and girls from ethnic minority communities. These include the Rohingya, of course, and Karen, Kachin, Chin, Shan, and many other communities, according to the United Nations Independent Fact-Finding Missions. And one particular fact is that these also include the sexual violence by the Myanmar military, also include against the men, boys, and members of the LGBTQI communities. And particularly in 2017, the military has committed rape, gang rape, sexual mutilations, and sexual slavery, and other brutal forms of sexual violence against Rohingya men, boys, women, and girls. UNFPA and Save the Children's have actually treated over 35,000 the Rohingya women and girls and boys, as well as estimated that over 65,000 people might be victims of sexual violence. And now after this February attempted coup in February 2021, the Myanmar military is committing sexual violence across the country as a weapon of war against the ethnic minorities in growing areas of armed conflicts, as a method of torture against civilians arbitrarily arrested or detained. While they're doing so, the Rohingya women in particular remain at serious risk of sexual violence and other forms of vulnerability in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. In Myanmar, the military now increases raids in Rohingya villages and conducting derogatory family list check-in processes, including photographing Rohingya women and children and other members of the Rohingya, and imposing restrictions on the movement, and many other forms of restrictions, not only reminded them of the historical behavior of the Myanmar military's sexual violence against their mothers and sisters. And in a lot, due to the severest forms of restrictions and in Rakhine State and continuations of the genocidal policies, in many cases, we're seeing that lately we're seeing a lot of the people leaving Rakhine State become women and children. Our recent report, Women's Peace Network, recent report on the arbitrary arrest and detain of Rohingya traveling from Myanmar to other parts of, from Rakhine to other parts of Myanmar or elsewhere, escaping genocide or persecutions in Myanmar, composed composed of at least 68% of women and children. And in most cases, these women and children face these women and children actually become victims of many other forms of violence, including sexual violence, sex trafficking, sexual slavery on their journey to the third country. And within Myanmar, if they are caught by the Myanmar military, they could be sentenced to at least 2 years of imprisonment. Since the February 1st coup, the Myanmar military has actually detained over 800 people, Rohingya women and men and children, and majority of them are women and men. In Bangladesh, according to the various UN report, 94% of the women and girls face sexual and gender-based violence. When you look at the root causes of this sexual and gender-based violence, it is not just that patriarchal culture that exists within the society, but also it is due to the distress and deplorable conditions in the refugee camps. And also the increase in securitizations and many other forms of restrictions against the community refugees in Bangladesh pose trauma and stigmatizations against the entire community, and women and girls become more vulnerable for gender-based violence, domestic violence, and other forms of violence. All of this, I must say that when 2016 and 2017 clearance operations happened, the widespread and the serious forms of sexual and gender-based violence against the Rohingya women by the Myanmar military was well known among the international community and well documented. And there has been many organizations, including United Nations, fact-finding missions, has recommended to provide a more comprehensive support to these victims of sexual and gender-based violence. Yet today we are seeing that there is little to no access of support system for these victims in Bangladesh. Therefore, I must say that the failure to provide, from the basic service, basics need to the greater protections for the Rohingya women and girls, including bringing justice for the sexual violence survivors, leaving them with no options. And once again, it's in Bangladesh, but choosing to take this riskier route to flee the camps and finding a freer life. And again, once again, like women leaving from Myanmar, it put them a lot of additional risks and vulnerability with the sexual traffickers and other criminal gangs. And now, with all of this situation, I think it's rooted to addressing the suffering of the Rohingya as a whole, as well as in particular need for addressing sexual and gender-based violence in conflict and many forms of conflict, as well as addressing impunity for these crimes. Unless we are able to end impunity for this sexual and gender-based violence and provide specific support and protections for the survivors and victims, we won't be able to achieve any forms of gender equality or any forms of like development and women development and empowerment that the entire world is preaching for. It is crucial that in all of these gender responsive work or financing women or advancing women and programs must be integrated to to addressing the protections of the women and girls in most sensitive and conflict affected area, including in Myanmar and for the Rohingya women. I'll stop here. I look forward to having Q&A later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wei Wei. So Wakashi, I'm going to turn to you now. So while we've recently seen some cases move forward for the Rohingya at the International Court of Justice, with the ICC potentially opening an investigation or, having some cases open shortly, but the larger calls for justice in Myanmar, which ethnic women have long been at the center of, remain largely unanswered. Ethnic women, including organizations like the Women's League of Burma, have long highlighted the need for accountability, and particularly for sexual violence against ethnic women. In 2014, I remember that WLB released a report called Same Impunity, Same Patterns, which noted that sexual abuses by the Burma army will not stop until there's a genuine civilian government, which is certainly an issue we're grappling with now in the context of the coup. So can you please tell us about the abuses that you're currently seeing in ethnic states and what you'd like to see happen to end the military's impunity? Over to you, Wakashi.
Thank you. Yes. Regarding sexual violence, it's become culture of Burma army. When there is a conflict and sexual violence committed by the Burma army, it's systematic and widespread. And it's not only happening in the current area, but in Shee, Kachin, Karenni, against Rohingya women and other ethnic people as well. So the Women's League of Burma members organization have documented various reports called like License to Rape by the Shan Women Action Network and Shattery Silences by the Korean Women's Organization, State of Terror, Walkie Amok Sharp Knives experienced by the women villages, and Catwalk to the Barrack by the More Women's Organizations, and then by the Women's League of Burma, Same Pattern, Same Impunity. So in the Same Pattern, Same Impunity report, it's documented between 2010 and 2014. And WLB have documented over 100 rape cases against ethnic women in the ethnic areas, and 47 cases were brutally gang raped. And also recently, the WLB also a recent report called Barrier at Every Turn. That's about the gender-based violence against the ethnic women between 2014 and 2020. So 11 women, WLB member reported 469 cases of gender-based violence that include domestic violence, sexual violence, rape, and attempt to rape. So we could see that the rape committed by the military regimes is systematic, it is widespread, and looking at the pattern, it is similar when there is a conflict taking place, and they are usually raped as a weapon of war against the ethnic women. So that even after the military coup, of course, like for some, like those who are in the city, we call it a military coup, but for the ethnic people, military coup is already more than 70 years in our areas. So that the experience of the ethnic people, the suffering that we have seen, we have gone through and suffer. It's like for some people, it's just a weakening, alarm for them. So that this is time for us to come together and unite and fight against this military regime. As long as this regime is still in power, then the system of impunity, the women under this brutal military regime will continue to suffer, and also we will never get justice under this military regime.
Thank you so much, Waku. So Esther, I'm going to turn to you next. Women, including you, have been at the center of the resistance to the Tatmadaw. And at the same time, we've seen the specific targeting of women, LGBTQI individuals, with acts of sexual and gender-based violence, including in detention contexts. Can you please share some information about the current situation on the ground for women who stand in opposition to the Tatmadaw? Sorry, my voice is cracking.
Yes, dear organizers and respected audience, thanks for having me today. And this is Esther from Myanmar, and I'm honored to be one of the speakers. I started my activism journey when the civil war is going to change.
Esther, sorry, can I interrupt? Could you just maybe come a little bit closer to your microphone just to,
Okay.
thank you so much.
So I started my activism journey when the civil war resumed in the Kachin region, the northern part of Burma in 2011. The resume war encouraged me to have curiosity over the duration of the conflicts and to work in the conflict. Over 60 years of military rule and 100 years of patriotic society in Myanmar creates the women's political participation to be marginalized. Regarding the role of the leadership women can play in the society, there are remaining substantial gender-based challenges for political participation in Myanmar. So, however, women and LGBTIQs from Myanmar led the political and social movements for various progressive social transformation sectors within the limitations. So we have to remember the first protester who got shot by the military fingers.
Sure, I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt you once again. We're just getting a lot of comments that people are having a difficult time hearing you. I know your internet connection's not very stable.
Yes, it would be because of my internet connection.
Yeah.
So I will be a bit slowed down.
Perfect. That's better. Thank you.
The first protester who got shot by the military fingers, brutal crackdown on peaceful demonstrators on February 9th in 2021 was 19 years ago. It's the third time. So many of the women was shot by the military fingers during this revolution, and although the military troops were brutally cracking down on demonstrators, the demonstrations led by women were not stopped. There are some famous slogans such as "Our Sarong, our flag, our victory," and "Women with the power, we will destroy the Red Army," and "Women who will crush the army raise their hands between the bars" are the most famous slogans used in women-led protests during this revolution period. So until now, women and LGBTIQ led demonstrations, and it can be seen everywhere across Myanmar. So a part of the challenges men leaders face, there are additional challenges for young women and LGBT protesters and leaders. According to my women and LGBTIQ comrades from the interrogation and detention centers, they were not only tortured, but they were also sexually harassed. And women and LGBTIQ protesters are seriously needed protection from sexual violence at this time. So it can be mentioned that violence against women increased after the military coup, because the military coup encouraged the perpetrators by the lack of rule of law, so that the sexual violence against women is on the rise under the corrupted laws. So there is no proper administrative apparatus and not place to complain for the violations too. So therefore, the victims or survivors are challenging the facing the challenges to get the justice. And the military junta and their fascist ideology can be mentioned as the root cause of the sustained gender-based violence in Myanmar. And they do not want to promote or protect the rights of gender, and even perpetrating human rights seriously, including the arbitrary arrest, killing, and sexual violence. So as currently the situation of Burma is under the military junta, there is no way to effectively reduce the violence and help the survivors of the violence at this time. So civil war is happening across the country in almost everywhere, and the people from areas where there was no fighting are now armed to fight the military dictatorship. So fighting and destructions are experienced daily across Myanmar, and the militaries are using excessive weapons, including use of airstrikes, bombing civilians, attacking and burning down villages are in clear violation of international law. So due to this, the atrocity conducted by the military council, people had to flee and hide every day, including women, children, and elderly people, and they are facing starvation, insecurity, and life-threatening danger. So especially the pregnant women and children are hard to get enough food and nutrition, and monthly sanitary pads for women are difficult too. yet as well due to the transportation difficulties. So despite of the serious risks women are facing, we are being used as a human shield, as the previous speakers already mentioned. And women are being used as a human shield by the military, facing mental and physical abuse, sexual violence, rape, shooting, and killing, being burned alive, arrested and tortured as an instrument of war. And so even the military junta kills, arrests, tortures, keep the information secret, and sexually assault people, including women, girls, LGBTIQ, and children. We keep joining the fight against the brutal military from any role we can. So some of us joined the People's Defense Forces, and some joined only female guerrilla troops. So we are risking our lives to liberate ourselves from the dictatorship and keen to participate in any role possible that we can play in the revolution, including the armed struggle. Because I have to say this, because we are not only fighting for the democracy and condemning the coup, but at the same time, we are also calling to end the patriarchal military and fighting for the gender equality.
Thank you so much, Esther, for so powerfully laying out the context of what's going on in the country now and the priorities for the country. Are you done?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to turn next to Ambassador Curry. Ambassador Curry, as we've just heard from Weiwei, Wakushi, and Esther, they've all powerfully laid out the landscape of sexual violence and more generally gender-based vulnerabilities across the country and why justice is essential. Can you please add in here from your expertise an overview of current accountability processes and how they can take gender into account?
Thank you, Akila. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm having the same kind of issues with my connection as Esther. Unfortunately, I think the same storm that she's suffering in Thailand is affecting my internet connection as well here. But thank you so much for letting me participate in this with this amazing panel of women leaders. They're women who I've worked with and admired their work for many years. And the center has done a wonderful job of assembling this strong panel of women leaders. And I remember back when the Women's League of Burma was being formed, and this was back at a time when the Women, Peace and Security agenda was just being formalized. And I remember the leading role that these Burmese women's organizations took in driving forward UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and making it a reality. And for decades, these women's organizations have been documenting the sexual and gender-based violence by the Burmese military, as Wakushi stated so eloquently and listed all of the different reports. They've been at the forefront of documenting these crimes against humanity and demanding justice for these crimes. And when the NLD won in 2015, won the elections in Burma, I think many of us around Burma and around the world hoped that this was the end of the military's impunity for committing these kinds of crimes. But unfortunately, as we've seen in 2016 and 2017, and right up until this week, with the reports of horrifying gang rapes in conflict areas, that the culture of the military has not changed. And I remember when I traveled to Naypyidaw with the UN Security Council after the genocidal 2017 attacks on the Rohingya community, it was clear from the discussions with Men Online and the rest of the general staff that this culture of impunity, of sadism and brutality was alive and well in the Burmese military. And it was also really clear that the Burmese military would not change unless they were held accountable and forced to change. And then finally, it was also clear that the NLD government was not able or willing to do what was necessary to hold the military accountable. So this is why many of us have been driving forward with these various international accountability mechanisms that are serving to document the crimes and that are building the evidential basis to prosecute the wrongdoers. And with everything from the Myanmar fact-finding mission that was authorized by the Human Rights Council, and also was supported by the General Assembly, and then the creation of the independent investigative mechanism, which was only the second of its kind after modeled on the Syria investigative mission. And then the Gambia's case that they are bringing at the International Court of Justice. These things are really having, these are serious international justice efforts. There's also the International Criminal Court case that is the consideration that's being given there, which I think the Bangladeshi government continues to support and wants to see brought forward. So I believe that we are seeing a number of mechanisms that have the potential to create accountability for the first time in Burma's history. And this is since the coup, we've also seen many of those who previously denied that there was a problem, who didn't want to talk about these problems, and who wanted to make these international accountability efforts go away, who opposed them and tried to shut them down. Many of those people have now come around and are supporting them, and they recognize the need for these kinds of accountability mechanisms and the importance of them and changing the dynamic, the political dynamic inside Burma, and bringing an end to conflict. And I think that as we continue to develop these mechanisms at the international level, as individual countries continue to look for opportunities to prosecute individual wrongdoers, which is also seen in cases regarding abuses in Syria and in other contexts, that's been another avenue that's been made available. I think that we will continue to see pressure on those who commit these kinds of abuses. They know that this is wrong. They've never had to face prosecution before, either domestically or internationally, but that is changing, and that is significant. And I think that it's a tribute to the women who I'm sharing this screen with, and many, many other Burmese women from all ethnicities and all communities who have done the painstaking work of documenting decades of systematic, intentional policies of the use of rape and sexual violence and gender-based violence as weapons of war in conflict, going back to the founding of Burma. And they've been very patient in building this case. And now is the time when we can hope to see the results of all of that painstaking and patient work to build the documentary evidence. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And just a note to the audience, we'll be moving into moderated Q&A. So if you do have questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A box at any time. And so, for my first question to the panelists, I think I'll pick up on a point that Kelly was just making, which is that, NLD, other leadership within the country long have held that accountability, particularly international accountability, isn't helpful. There was an understanding at the idea that, these are things that in due course maybe will be dealt with at the domestic level, perhaps after, peace talks that never really moved forward. The ethnic states were concluded. And, we saw kind of some very flawed attempts at domestic accountability, including the so-called Independent Commission of Inquiry, which released its report in 2020, but a report that also refuted any allegations of sexual violence during the Rohingya genocide, which was deeply in contrast to the information that was found by the FFM. So, in this landscape where we have new actors, where we have the NUG in place, we have the NUCC process going on, I'd love to get, the panelists' reflections both on the current approaches to justice and accountability by actors like the NUG, and what more could they be doing to show their commitment to justice, including for the Rohingya, to show that their approach to justice and accountability looks different than what the NLD was taking. Maybe I'll start with Weiwei here, but open it up to the others to participate as well.
Thank you, Akila. This is an excellent question. I think Myanmar leaderships or international communities need to learn from the mistakes and need to reflect on what has been done against the Rohingya people and other ethnic communities. Over the past 10 years, there was an attempt to minimize the suffering of the people and the crimes happening on the ground. There was denial of sexual violence as a whole, and the NLD leaderships and the previous government actually denied all of this brutal form of sexual violence, which is utterly shameful, and they must be ashamed of it. And so, all of this has to, the new leaderships need to reflect on what has been done. First of all, it is very, very important that the NUG or any new leaderships in Myanmar recognize the crimes as it is, and in particular the seriousness of the sexual and gender-based violence against the women, both Rohingya women and all other women across the country. We cannot minimize how brutal and how these violences impact not only just the victims and survivors, not only just the women, but also the entire communities and entire country. And that has to come as a first step. And then second, given the seriousness of the crimes, and this crimes has been well documented and concluded by the fact-finding missions and many other independent and commissions and investigations that as amount to genocides or crimes against humanity, these crimes cannot be just prosecuted through the domestic accountability processes. Given Myanmar's judiciary being utterly corrupt or incapable of prosecuting any of this crime with a fair and free and fair manner, it is important that we or the leaderships in Myanmar, current and future leaderships in Myanmar, seeks the international justice processes, comprehensive international justice process that has a heavy weight on the sexual and gender-based violence. And so that's the second step. Then as a third steps, I think there is a lot of room for the NUG and NUCC to explore, to basically come up with a comprehensive transitional justice plan and processes that must be inclusive, inclusive of the context of the violence, nature of violence against the different ethnic communities, as well as the specific focus on the sexual and gender-based violence. And all of these processes, planning and implementations of these transitional justice processes must be a victim-centered, community-centered approach. I think these are some of the steps that they can be doing, but moving forward as a country, there are a lot more to be done.
Thank you, Wei Wei. Does anyone else want to come in here? Ambassador Curry, did you want to add any comments?
Sure, I will just, I don't think there is much to add. Wei Wei covered the waterfront there, but one thing that I do hope that the NUG and others involved in that process, especially those who were part of previous governments that were part of the process of denial and dehumanization, and who helped with the enabling and the impunity, that they are, as Wei Wei said, reflecting on that. And I think that one of the most important parts of any transitional justice effort is that acknowledgement. And as part of the restorative justice process is that recognition and acknowledgement of the role that people played, and that even though they were the perpetrators of the violence, they did help to enable it, and that is something that they have to come to terms with in order to move forward.
Just to add one more thing, one of the things that I have realized when we engage with the NUG and seeing some of their reports and statements, I am afraid that it does, the way that they've been approaching for the justice and accountability is simply it's very narrowly tailored towards the military. But I think it is important that there is a need for broader discussions and accountability approach, not just limited to the military, but also everybody involved in these processes in the past and current must be held accountable. And a comprehensive accountability process is required as a strategy to rebuild the country and heal the communities, including women and girls, as well as as a country to move forward. We cannot just simply blame military for for all the crimes. There are other actors directly or indirectly involved, and they must be held accountable as well.
Thank you for that, Wei Wei. I think it certainly also highlights why something like the ICJ case is so important, because it looks at state accountability as a whole for the acts that were committed. It indicts the entire system that allowed genocide to happen, rather than just focus also on individuals who may have been particularly criminally culpable. Esther or Wakushi, I don't know if there was anything either of you wanted to add here.
I think it has said already, like all the important points that, the apology, the recognitions, and also, if we want to move forward, and also it is important that those who have committed, those who are part of this, not apart from the military, and those who are part of this also need to come up. And as we already said, they also need to be held accountable for what they did in the past. And also with the current NUG or NUC, they also should have a clear strategy, and also like a clear policy on accountability and justice and how they're going to move forward.
Thank you, Waku. Esther?
Yes, all of the main facts were already mentioned by the previous speakers. So I would like to add some from the perspective of the people. So I want to recall some of the—
Esther, sorry, can I just ask you maybe to just get a little closer to your microphone? Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much for your patience.
Yeah, okay. So I want to add some points from the perspective of ethnic people. So when the military coup was happened and detained the NLD senior members on first February, many of the non-Burmese ethnic people do not want to join the resistance movement at first because of the distrust between the majority Burmese and the ethnic minority. So since Burma military junta got a chance to avoid serious international condemnations for war crimes and crime against humanity and the genocidal crimes during the NLD-led civilian government. So there were also several problems between the ethnic nationalities and NLD, and that national reconciliation effort by the national NLD team was not successful, and that made the ethnic forces reluctant to join in the beginning of the movement. So I just want to record that. And but right now, however, the public protest groups come up with the basic principles, which are in line with principles that ethnic people fighting to achieve for many decades. So such as to end the military dictatorship, to abolish the 2008 constitution, and to form the Federal Democratic Union. Ethnic organizations and ethnic armed groups started to support the public movement. So among the ethnic forces, most active group can be seen as Kachin, Karen, and Chin-based organizations, along with the supporters of NLD from the Burmese region. So right now, the NUG is generating the government body in cooperation with ethnic units, some of the ethnic units, and we also started mentioning the perspective on the Rohingya issue and the past what we have done in the past, and we are now trying to speak out, starting to speak out what they have done. So this move is just a very few move related to the incidents that were happened, and many lives were shattered. So it is not enough for sure. But at this time, it is we can say like we have a few moves in the end of the period. So I expected that more of the following implementations will come up, not only speaking out for what we have done, but also the real implementation needed to become a follow-up after this. So as I've mentioned about the side from the ethnic perspective, like ethnic people also know it is also in the condition that how the NLD members will move on with under the title of NUG, since the NUG is organized with a large quota of NLD members. So it is still in that situation, but at this time, our main goal is to against the military dictatorship. So under this title, it is still in the middle of the in the middle of the yes. So that's the reason. So however, I think in my perspective, NLD leaders of this time should be voiced, and and next how to say how the NUG and NUCC will go will depend on the current leaders of the NUG and how wise they are, and how can they negotiate and with the ethnic people and also the Rohingya people. If the Burmese leaders are not open-minded about justice and accountability at this time, the reconciliation process in Myanmar will no longer be implemented, and maybe at least within 2 or 3 decades.
Thank you, Esther. I mean, I think, all of your comments have demonstrated that there is no one solution to justice. It's about building a culture of justice, that advocacy looks at not just the international community, but working with, current and future leadership of the country to really think about how you build a holistic culture of accountability, and maybe, keeping with this pattern of zooming out a little bit from justice as perhaps a criminal process to something more holistic. I'd like to, we're here at the Commission on the Status of Women. I think there's something to probe here about the connections between sexual violence and gender inequality more generally, right? Sexual violence is not something that happens in a vacuum, but is very strongly connected to gender equality. Gender equality is also more generally connected to peace, to longer lasting peace, to the inability to fall into conflict. And in Myanmar, gender inequality was a significant problem before the coup. And it wasn't a particular priority of the government. We had things like the POA law that were working through a very slow process and not getting too far in terms of even creating domestic systems of protection for violence. And so, to think about this larger context of gender equality, I think, what does everyone think about what the priorities need to be around gender equality as it connects to these crimes of SGBV, as it connects to gender? But how do you move forward as we talk about this process now with the NUG and the NUCC for a more inclusive Myanmar that also centers some of these gender-based concerns? I see you're ready, Wei Wei. Go for it.
Yeah, if no one's, I guess, yes, the patriarchal systems and, gender inequality as a result is it's like in any other countries, but in a more severe forms, given the culture of military dictatorships exists for decades, and so it's and the military has weaponized the gender for their benefit and for their interest, and in most cases even used as a weapon of war, as we discussed earlier, to terrorize an entire community or to destroy us. So, and that notion, that understanding has to be spread across the country, not only among the leadership, but also among the people as well. As we move forward, I think in rebuilding a new justice systems, I think and people started to realize how they have been treated and need to be able to speak up on their experiences and find or seek able to seek justice system mechanisms for or in different ways, not only just criminal justice systems, criminal justice, but also like basically being publicly able to discuss and open up, their suffering, individual suffering and collective suffering. I think that is one way to change or to move forward, changing the mindset, changing the culture of thinking about justice as a whole is required. And there are a lot of other things need to be done, institutional level and structural level. And as we talk about, structure, we have to basically rebuild everything, like from the law enforcement to the law enforcement bodies to the institution that's been so gendered and disrespect women in many ways. As a result, there has been a culture of violence against women by the institution, by the structures. That has to be changed as well. To be able to do so, we definitely need a stronger policies that include a stronger, there is already a good start from the federal charter where they have a really strong gender lens. But moving forward, I think we definitely need a stronger gender lens in all our documents, like federal charters to the constitutions and all of the new laws that we are going to create as enact. And the strong gender lens is required. Second, a specific focus on the ending sexual and gender-based violence is required. That's how I see it. That will only end in impunity and end in culture of impunity, as well as having a stronger prevention plans would allow us to really promote gender equality as a whole. So that is required, and therefore right now we are actually advocating or pushing, many of us women's organizations are pushing for a gender policy groups within the NUCC so that we can actually push for the gender policy as well as the sexual and gender-based violence policy, and longer term promoting gender equality and rule of law in Myanmar. That would include having creating a national action plan on the women's peace and security, as well as integrating international laws to the domestic laws, and having at least a law that would translate the international law to the domestic law, so that women in Myanmar in the future will have more preventions and protections, including and avenue for this gender equality. I think these are important steps that we are trying internally, domestically, but we need a lot of support from the international community. That includes for the international community to really address the serious, crucial, systematic, and widespread gender-based violence and sexual violence happen against the different ethnic communities, including the Rohingya.
Thanks, Wei Wei. Wakashi, did you want to come in here?
Yes, in terms of gender equality and anti-impunity in Burma, the the first thing is the current situation is really difficult, because the military regime is still there and still very powerful. So the first thing that the international could do or should do is continue funding the women's organization that are already doing good work. They've been documenting ongoing human rights violations, sexual violence, and to do advocacy at every level. So it's important that the works of the women are continue to be supported. And another things like allocate funding, and international should use their funding as a pressure to push for women's quota, the quotations. And it has changed a lot, in the past 10 years, that the donor, especially international donor, could also make the difference by imposing quota by using their funding. And we should also support the youth, the younger generation have so much understanding, and after the coup we could see that many people come out, apologize, and also confess that what happened in the past, and they understand it differently, and now many young people come together, so which is a good sign. So it's good, we support the youth movement, and they can come together in terms of the reconciliations. And for the short term, at the moment, I don't see that in terms of justice and impunity, it will not happen as long as this military regime is in power. So if the international is committed to end sexual violence and also end system of impunity in Burma, the first thing is the pressure also important. Pressure is needed. Pressure from the international is needed. The international should stop doing business and selling arms to the military regimes. Stop doing business that they can earn money to buy more weapons and kill their own people. And then they stop selling the weapons that the military is using against their own people. And then for the long term, of course, we could go through the international justice mechanism. That will be for the long term. At the moment, for the short term, this is what we need at the moment. As long as this military regime, we will continue to suffer this, and impunity will not happen. This is why we need to bring down this military regime first. Thank you.
Thank you, Waku. Esther or Kelly, did you want to add anything? Go ahead, Esther.
Yes, I also would like to support the and if we really want to end the impunity and the violence in Myanmar, we have to stop the military and we have to the militarized Myanmar is a threat for the women, and support the current Myanmar Spring Revolution and end the dictatorship is the same supporting women's rights and to prevent and reduce the gender-based violence from Myanmar. So that is the main problem. Militarized Myanmar is the main problem, so we have to remove it first, because even if we do many projects on Myanmar and sexual violence cases in Myanmar, it would be the same if the military is still remains. So I would like to mention here that the international support for the to fly with the current Muslim revolution in order to end the impunity.
Thanks, Esther. Ambassador Curry? No? Okay, great. Sorry, I seem to have muted myself. I think that this is, I thank everyone for kind of very powerfully sharing the short term, the long term, what really needs to happen, how to center women's full, meaningful, and equal participation, which I think is a big component of this work that's often dropped out in the focus on things like violence. And so I think, I hope that the voices of and your recommendations are really heeded. And maybe picking up on Wakushi's point around the need for the international community to act. And maybe this is where we'll conclude here as well. So I welcome anyone's kind of concluding reflections and answer to this question. But, in face of Ukraine, we've seen that the inability to act by the international community is just code for lack of political will, right? We saw that within a week, it's possible to invoke Security Council action, General Assembly action. Over 40 countries have referred the situation in Ukraine to the ICC, something that women's civil society in Myanmar has been calling for over 15 years. And yet we've never seen any of those actions. We've seen the Human Rights Council act. And so I think, this really creates a contrast with this kind of failure by the international community to heed the calls from women's groups to ensure justice and accountability, to support, movement forward in Myanmar. So maybe to conclude, I'll ask everyone just what are your top recommendations of what concretely you'd like to see out of the international community to help build a culture of, end the cycle of impunity and help set Myanmar on its path forward to a federal, inclusive, multi-ethnic country. And maybe we'll start backwards in terms of the panelists. So we'll start with Ambassador Curry and we'll end with Weiwei. So we'll go backwards in order.
So I think that, one thing that we talk around a lot, but don't address forthrightly is security sector reform. And this is something that has been, it's never the right time. And I remember going back to 2010, 2012, and trying to have conversations with my own government and with other donors that normally like to talk about security sector reform, but in Burma, they did not want to talk about security sector reform. And if, clearly, I think that the coup itself has shown that it was a mistake to think that security sector reform was too delicate of a topic to bring up, and that was a huge error in judgment on the part of the international community. And so we shouldn't make that judgment error again. I think also you're absolutely right that we now have seen with Ukraine that the international community can act with alacrity when they want to. And so a lot of the excuses that we've been hearing for the past few years should no longer be accepted by anyone, including me. And I think about some of the things that we were told inside the U.S. government and some of the things that I repeated to my friends on this call. Weiwei can call me out on some of those things in particular, where I was like, we just can't get it done inside the U.S. government. And then I've seen them, perform miracles in the past few weeks compared to some of these things. So I think that there does need to be a real accountability for those who put themselves out as avatars and as examples of supporters of accountability and international accountability and international justice, but who have failed utterly over the past few years to take those responsibilities seriously when it comes to Myanmar, to Burma, and other contexts as well. I think about Syria and I think about Afghanistan and many other places around the world where women have been systematically denied opportunities and subjected to horrific violence, and where the international community has just done, at the end of the day, nothing about it, except for wringing their hands and saying how awful it is.
Thank you, Ambassador Curry. Esther. Esther, did you want to add anything here? You're on mute.
Yes. I would like to add that lives from Myanmar are not just in numbers, because whenever people talk about Myanmar and about Myanmar, most of the international community talks about the population and about the data. But then I want to realize lives are not just in numbers. So actually, Myanmar people have high expectations and hope powerful international communities such as the ASEAN
cutting out quite a bit. Do you mind just getting, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So since the military junta are the strongest and the most powerful institution in Myanmar, and people find it difficult to defend by themselves, I want to encourage the global policy-making community to focus on supporting the side of Myanmar civilian in this green revolution instead of staying silent or being neutral on the Myanmar crisis and juntas and restraint violence. Because people are struggling toughness, and on this day, I also would like to add that to end the cycle of the impunity, to end the military is a must in Myanmar because they are the source of all of the gender-based violence problems, sexual violence problems, and also all of the cycle of impunity was started from them. So international community also need to recognize and fight and cooperate with the current national unity government and as sole representative of Myanmar people, not the military junta. This is a must also. Even though it is quite there are so much to have a debate about the national and unity government, but that is just so representative of Myanmar people at current time. So creating opportunities, educate, nurture, and support leadership are also a must to continue in this tragedy. Even though we are in this tragedy, they should not be stopped. As the previous speaker mentioned in the process, Radhakrishnan mentioned in the previous discussion. Also, it is supporting to the women organizations have to be continued even though we are in this tragedy. So expect to enhance the voice of Myanmar from each sector and support their capacity, create financial opportunities should have to be continued at this time. And problems should also be sorted out and need a platform to be heard. And the next thing is the international community have to continue more sanction on the military and their related community. And they also can do more sanctions to give pressure on the military junta. There are some Western and US citizens working for the military dictators in high position in the SAC. That should not be happened because the related governments also need to take action to them and their family immediately by eliminate their citizenship, their bank account, all the bloody properties if you really stand with the Myanmar people. So furthermore, so what international community should do is that arm embargo and approving the enforcing no-fly zones in Myanmar. As civilians are severely targeted by the military juntas, cruel air strikes across the country, banning no-fly zones would be the best option to save many innocent lives of the people. Not selling oil also included, and for armed embargo, China, Russia, and other Western countries should cooperate on this issue for stability. But yes, I hope this, but I don't think it would happen. But to get a peace in the Indo-Pacific region. So there was a famous protest during the Myanmar Revolution that how many lives are needed to get help from the international community. But it can still relate to the massive international community, even though they might say we are doing our best, because we know that they can do better than this. Because according to the current international affairs, we see that they can do better the way rather than the way they treat to the Myanmar issue. So how someone can be escaped from being bullied by armed person, right? So how someone can be escaped from being bullied by someone who is with a gun. So we are looking for help from the international community because it is a conflict between no armed citizens and armed military juntas. It is not between the other armed organizations, but the civilians and the military juntas. So the instant response from international community lead them, people have to take care of their own security and fish to get out. So people really want to be in peace, but according to the situation, they have to respond for their security. So that is how people now have to take care of their own security by taking by getting arms. Yes.
Thank you so much, Esther. And I think we should certainly never censor ourselves by what is possible as we're making recommendations for what we're asking for here. Shee, do you want to come in here?
Yes, just I would like to add a little bit more on the current structure that continue to be working right now in Burma is the only ethnic existing structures. In terms of like justice system, education, healthcare, governance system, like we continue to be factions, you know, as a like a government, as a federal bloc, so that it's need to be strengthened. In Burma, like you know, everything's like it. I mean, the military is there, and it cannot be faction like before, like as a government. So that this is why it's important that the ethnic, I mean, the international community work directly with the ethnic people, strengthening like the existing structures. And of course, like we have a strong women's organizations, and also strengthen you know, the women's organization that are part of the ethnic women, and also of course they are working with other women as a broader, you know, women's movement. So like in terms of like international aid, it should go, you know, directly to the ethnic communities, the ethnic, I mean the ethnic existing structures. Because now, like for example, if people want to come to the, you know, hospital, then many people are coming to our area to access to health. And in terms of our education, our school continue to be running, and I mean healthcare, we have many hospital, clinic, and also like many CDN doctors that joining our, you know, integrate into our system, and also school teachers, the CDN school teachers that join our teachers. So it's a good that we continue to strengthen it. We also have like a justice system that the KW also working to, you know, to try to work with the KNU Justice Department, so that you know, the law that are oppressing women, they try to change, you know, the domestic law like that are oppressing women. So this is something that we could you know, support if we want to, you know, see for a bigger picture in the future. And the last thing is like support the federal, the establishment of the federal. And it is important that the NUG right now, even though like I understand that the trust is stay very low, so that what is the guarantee for the ethnic people? Like one day, if you know, something happen, or like if the leader released, or you know, we cannot see the future. So that it is important that it is guaranteed in the constitutions, the federal constitution, so that it is important that NUG is working together with ethnic peoples, draft to the federal constitution. That's a guarantee, and also can be trusted by the ethnic people.
Thank you, Shee. Wei, over to you for the last word.
Sure. Thank you very much. I would just echo and add a little bit on what my co-panelist has already discussed and recommended. Seeing the response, what happened in Ukraine break our heart too. We are very sorry for the people of Ukraine, and it's we understand how does it feel like, you know, to face such an injustice and violence by outsiders, or you know, by those who have more power. We understand that. However, the international community's response also make us realize how international community use double standard and abandon our people of Burma for decades. Our suffering is also same suffering as anybody else in Ukraine or in Syria or, you know, in Iran or Iraq. none of the suffering around, in the world should be minimized based on our color or our religion or our geography or where we are located. We all need equal protection. And that's what the international community has shown us, the double standard. We've been calling for the protections for years. We've been calling to end the impunity of the military's violence for years, but we were abandoned. We felt abandoned, completely abandoned, not just on ending violence and ending impunity and protection, but also even for our basics need on the ground. We feel absolutely abandoned. Those lofty statements does not actually help us. It's only prolong the crisis, prolong the suffering and prolong the pain. We need actions. We need actions from the governments. We need actions from the UN Security Council. So, we have seen this now many times, including with the Ukraine. UN Security Council resolution is possible if there is political will. And please show us your political will by adopting a resolution that include ending impunity, sending the militaries to the ICC, and so that we can address a more holistic accountability of the suffering of all people and different natures of the crimes. And that includes global arms embargo, that include economic sanctions and financial penalties for the militaries and its businesses. And also that includes the protections and rebuilding the people, the victims' communities in the different part of Myanmar. Right now, that is essential, the first and foremost important thing for us, for the UN Security Council to show us a political will by doing this. And secondly, as my sisters has already mentioned, people on the ground are suffering in many, many forms. And in many cases, there aren't enough humanitarian support, humanitarian aid, and people are suffering from hunger and many other forms of vulnerabilities. And these has to be equipped through local systems and through ethnic communities, through the local leaderships and civil society organizations and women's groups. These are required, and support generally for the democracy movement and democracy movement as a whole, and specifically different ethnic communities, and decentralizations of support is essential at this time of revolutions. And lastly, on the Rohingya situations, I think the failure, it's a classic failure of the international community when it's come to the genocide. And because of the failure, the community continued to suffer in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, in India, and elsewhere. And in most cases, they're further victimized and securitized and put in deteriorating or the heightening security and livelihood conditions in the camps, put in people a lot of pressures and re-traumatizations and impact, result in negative health consequences as a community as a whole. And this must be end. And this must be end. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei Wei, for just, I think, so powerfully calling out the double standard and, giving, everyone here has given a path forward on what needs to happen domestically, what needs to happen internationally. I always learn so much whenever I engage in conversations with diverse women from Myanmar. I think, the solutions have always been there. And it's a matter of putting all of you in the places internationally and domestically to be in charge of designing and leading the process forward. So I thank everyone so much for joining us today on behalf of the Global Justice Center and Women's Peace Network. And, thank you for being here. Really appreciate your solidarity and for being in community with us. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.